Tonight we have stories of survival from passengers who were aboard Flight 4819. It is those remarkable accounts that are shedding light on the harrowing moments that led to the crash. But still, so many questions remain about what led to this. No. More than 24 hours later, it's hard to imagine everyone on board the flight managed to walk away. As the investigation continues, airport officials spoke about the crash.
The remains of the aircraft will remain on the runway while the investigators are performing their reviews. We expect that could be about 48 hours. And so until that time, 2 of our runways will remain closed, and that is affecting the volume of traffic that we're having. So passengers should be looking and working with their airlines, checking our website for information on delays and potential cancellations as well for the next several days.
Lots of angles, lots of voices on this story. And let's begin with Sarah Galashan. And Sarah, what details do we have about what investigators are looking for here?
Right. Well, so as you mentioned off the top there, the TSB, the Transportation Safety Board, they are on the ground. In fact, there's 20 of them on the tarmac right now, milling about this aircraft. And they have confirmed just in the last hour or so that they do have the flight voice recorder and the data recorder as well. So sort of the black box, if you will. And those have been sent to a lab for further analysis. In addition to those 20 TSB officials who are investigating this, as well as representatives from the U.S. FAA. They're also involved in trying to figure out exactly what happened in this, some extraordinary footage that we've been showing. And it is quite incredible. And the aftermath incredible, too, in that you consider that this CRJ 900 is still on runway 23 at Pearson International Airport in Toronto, lying on its back, the wings clipped off. And the TSB has done something. They've put out their statement, as I say, in just the last hour or so. It's a video statement. They do a sort of walk and talk, a show and tell around this aircraft that's just lying there. And I want to play just a little bit of it. I haven't actually seen the TSB put out a video statement before. And just given the background here, it's also extraordinary footage. Take a listen.
As you can see here, the fuselage came to rest slightly off the right side of the runway, upside down, facing the other direction. Other duties we'll be conducting here on site are examining the wreckage, examining the runway. We've already removed the cockpit voice recorder, the flight data recorder, and we've sent them to our lab for further analysis.
And so it's going to stay that way probably for about another 48 hours. And that was as of this morning. So that's taking us probably to about Thursday. Even then, they can't reopen what is the longest runways east-west and north-south. And those are the 2 runways right now that are closed. That's presenting some, as you can imagine, Ian, significant challenges for Pearson International Airport. From Thursday to Sunday, they had like 50 centimeters of snow accumulation, and it caused massive cancellations that they were dealing with. And then, of course, bring it to yesterday, and I think the number was 462 cancellations. So the backlog that people are dealing with right now at Pearson, passenger-wise, pretty frustrating. And the airport's going to take some time in order to be able to actually reopen the runways and get things moving again. Yeah, when there are delays and cancellations at Pearson, they have a ripple effect all across the country. I'm sure there are people watching now, some of whom have felt the impact of all of that. And we can talk about delays and cancellations because what happened here with this plane was not the tragedy that could have happened. Yeah. Everyone walked out of here. What do we know about the injuries? Well, so we now know it was 21 people, and that number has slowly gone up. 21 people who were injured to some degree and had to be taken to hospital. Of those, 19 have been released from hospital. We knew that some of those passengers, a small handful, were suffering what they believed to be critical injuries, but there was some clarification as to just exactly what that meant. So the extent of the injuries really were back pain. There was nausea, anxiety. There was headaches, possible some kind of head injury that had been suffered. And so what we heard at that press conference this morning from paramedics is that, when you have a patient who says they have a head injury, that has to be taken very seriously, has to be considered to be potentially critical, but very quickly. As I say, 19 of the 21 have now been released, and none of the injuries that were suffered, and we said this yesterday, are believed to be life-threatening. Everyone is expected to survive this and be able to walk away.
And to help us break down what happened during this dramatic crash, let's turn to aviation journalist Mark Miller. Mark, you were a key part of our coverage yesterday. Thank you for that. And thank you for coming back today. Amazing. I know you've covered so many crashes. To hear from someone who was inside the plane as it happened a day after.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to provide lots of information. All the people that were on that airplane, including the flight crew that were at the front of the airplane operating it. That's a treasure trove of information. Yeah. You know, the fact that the airplane did not break up, I mean, look at that thing, that did not break up as it sort of spun around down that runway. None of that fire went inside the airplane. We saw the big fireball. We didn't know about that last night, really, till we started to see those videos.
Yeah.
So it's remarkable. Had that fire got inside, people would have been hurt, maybe killed. We may have had a much bigger fire inside that airplane.
Let's look at the footage. There's been so many angles of the actual crash itself, and this relatively new. As you see that, Mark, what goes through your mind?
Well, you know, we were trying to figure out what this approach was like all night, and then this video came out this morning, and you can see as the airplane comes in, it does look like a stable approach. It looks pretty normal. And but we don't see, as that airplane gets over the runway, is we do not see him flare. We don't see him raise that nose. He just basically flew it in.
So you're not only an aviation journalist, you're a pilot.
Yep.
So you would normally expect to see a pilot pull the nose up as they're about to land?
So just watch this. You see he's almost parallel with the ground. We would normally see that nose come up, you know, 10, 15 degrees. It doesn't happen. So that put all the energy into that one landing gear. And you can see the wing just sort of tilts off to the right. I think he was coming in. He was crabbing into the wind. So he was sort of slipping down the flight, down the approach. And at the last second, he straightens it out, but he has to dip his wing. And for whatever reason, he didn't raise the nose.
And so early on, there were questions about the crosswinds, which were, up to 25, 35 knots, I think?
Yep.
Yeah. And so we talked to a pilot yesterday who said that those winds by themselves didn't raise a red flag for him. We don't know if the runway was slippery or not. We know there was a notice to aviators saying that there were sections of the runway that were slippery. Would either of those two things, the potential for winds, the potential for a slippery runway, explain why this plane didn't flare just before it landed?
So there is one theory, and I don't know what the operating procedures or techniques trained for these pilots are at this airline. But there are some airlines where they ask you to make a positive landing. So if it's wet or the runway is slippery, you want to really kind of plant the airplane on there in a solid way. So that might explain why there isn't a big flare at the end. But there shouldn't still be that kind of descent rate where it's going to rip the landing gear off. All that weight went onto that one landing gear, which is actually attached to a really strong part of the wing, and then the wing comes off. There's no way you should be coming down with that kind of a descent rate. Everybody who looks at this in aviation is asking the same question. Why is he hitting the ground with such a high vertical speed?
Let's talk about a procedural issue that you identified. Interesting because you have been covering so many aviation incidents over so many years. And that is, I think you told us this is the first U.S. registered passenger plane that the TSB, the Transportation Safety Board in Canada, is investigating. Yes. So it sounds kind of nerdy, Mark. What's the significance of that?
Well, the last time an American registered passenger plane crashed in Canada was 1985, Gander, Newfoundland. It was an American military charter. And in fact, that accident triggered the sort of, the closure of the Canadian Aviation Safety Board, and it was replaced by the Transportation Safety Board. I think it was Safety Bureau it was called. Anyway, and that happened because there was pressure from the Americans as to what the results of the Canadian investigation was. So the question people are asking now is, Canadian investigators, American airplane, will there be any pressure from the Americans on this? Last time this happened, there was, and we lost our investigating body. And now I'm told we have a much more robust investigating body. That can't happen again. All indications are everybody's professional. I've worked with the National Transportation Safety Board before on shows. I think it'll be fine, but it's just something to keep your eye on.
Yeah, I mean, I've also talked to lots of their investigators. They do seem to be independent, do a very good job. And of course, that crash you're talking about in Newfoundland and Labrador involved American servicemen, right?
That's
so
right.
they're probably like higher kind of political issues or concerns at that time. One last thing I want to ask you about. You know, we're both journalists. We both have an interest in getting information out as quickly as possible and accurately as possible. The Greater Toronto Airport Authority in their news conferences have said very little. Yesterday, answering no questions. Even to this point tonight, we haven't gotten a lot of information from them.
I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure that the airport authority, whether it's in Vancouver or in Toronto, I'm not sure they actually know, what the issues here are. One of the things that investigators are going to look at, it's those winds, weather. And somebody said to me, Mark, when you're landing on runway 23, look to the right. There's a giant Air Canada hangar, a series of other hangars. And as that air comes over, it starts to get turbulent and burble. So we know that the ride down wasn't too bad because people didn't talk about turbulence, but something happened right at the end where things became more dynamic and something went wrong. So was it the air coming across the runway? I don't think that the airport authority knows those kinds of things. I know we've asked those questions, but I don't see how runway clearing, snow clearing has anything to do with this. This looks like an environmental issue, maybe an operational issue, and the investigators will get at that.
Yeah, well, the Transportation Safety Board on the case, and we can be reasonably confident that they'll get the answers at some point. Mark, we're really lucky to have you helping us in our coverage. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian.
One of the remarkable details from the video of the crash landing are the clear instructions from the flight attendants. So just how critical these directions are, maintaining cool composure in situations like this is something a lot of us have been reflecting on. And so we've reached Wesley Lasowski. He's a flight attendant with more than 25 years of experience. He's also the president of the Air Canada component at the Canadian Union of Public Employees. And he joins us now from 100 Mile House in British Columbia's interior. Wesley, obviously you weren't involved either in this situation nor with this airline. It was a Delta plane, but you certainly know what it's like to be a flight attendant. And in an emergency situation like this, with a plane flipped upside down, and it happened without any warning, the passengers were not in the crash position, what are the first steps for flight attendants in that situation?
The first step is to maintain your composure, but do a quick assessment of the situation and see exactly what you're up against. Your ideal move is to get everybody off that aircraft in an expedited fashion. So you're immediately looking for who's your able-bodied passengers, who can assist you with possibly getting the door open in that scenario, getting people off in an orderly fashion, and just, maintaining the composure of the cabin and getting everybody off as quickly as possible. So you're constantly monitoring for kind of the next obstruction to come across.
We've seen video of flight attendants calmly and safely helping passengers get off that plane. As you've seen that video, what do you make of it?
I see that they did an excellent job based on what I've seen. They got people off calmly. They assisted people off. They seem to be monitoring the cabin in a sense of making sure as much can be left behind as they could. It's still unfortunate to see that passengers were bringing stuff off and focusing in on the filming aspect opposed to getting off safely. But they really seem to do a remarkable job and really maintain their composure to alleviate the stress of the passengers that were on board to get them off.
Give me a little insight into the training that you and other flight attendants have, because, I mean, I've flown a lot and never been in any kind of emergency situation, obviously never in a situation like this. But what kind of training do you have so that people do make that switch from one moment just sitting down thinking it's going to be a routine landing to all of a sudden having to evacuate passengers to safety?
No, it's an excellent question. I think the biggest type of training that we go through is to be trained on how to react to the unknown. So if we knew what was coming, we necessarily may not be required because you'd know. So we need to be prepared for whether it's a fire, CPR, death on board, all those types of things. So you're constantly refreshing yourself on takeoff, on landing. Those are part of the things that we're trained to do, is understand what's going on in the cabin, listen for certain things, watch for certain things, smelling certain things, everything. It's a constant training.
One last thing, as someone who I have to admit has become kind of blasé about the safety warnings that you get on a plane, and even kind of getting ready for landing. It's like, okay, we're going to get ready for landing. Everything's going to be fine. Maybe this can be a reminder, a wake-up call for anybody who's watching, who will be flying. What should we be keeping in mind?
You know, the biggest thing that I say is obviously follow the instructions of the cabin crew. They're there for your safety. If you're in a situation like this, or any situation where you have to get off the aircraft in a fast manner, leave your personal belongings behind. There's no need to impede evacuation by bringing that, and there's no need to film it. The goal here is to get off the plane with less intrusion as possible. So follow the crew's commands. They're there to promote your safety and get you off safely, and if you do that, then everybody's expedited off the aircraft.
All right, really nice to have your perspective on this, Wesley. Thank you. Welcome back. I can't overstate how pleased I am to be able to chat with Johanna and Sarah at any time. Fantastic to have you guys here with me, but also fantastic to have you here to chat about this story, this plane crash story, which has been remarkable. And Sarah, one of the things that you and I have talked about before the show, and let's talk about it now, there seems to be, let me put it this way, a lack of clarity from airport officials in Toronto when it comes to what was going on at Pearson when this crash happened.
I mean, they have definitely, I think anybody who was watching yesterday's press conference and then watching it again today, there seems to be a bit of a walk back in terms of certainty over what those runway conditions were, whether or not they did play a role or did not play a role. To that, I do have the clip of yesterday. It was the fire chief who was, pretty clear about what he felt was, something that could be agreed upon. And then we had the president of the airport say something a little bit different, definitely not being as committed. So take a listen to that.
What we can say is the runway was dry and there was no crosswind conditions.
This would not be a time for us to have theory or to speculate on what caused the crash.
So, the other thing that struck me, and this was like for hours as we were talking about this yesterday with these spectacular and not spectacular in a good way pictures that we were looking at, something so unusual. The airport was, the official line coming from it was this was described as an incident. And that just felt so not quite enough in terms of describing what you're looking at.
Yeah, and Mark Miller made a really good point earlier in the hour that a lot of this information, it's not for the airport authority to give it out anyway, but when they said definitively, the fire chief, that runway was clear, there were no winds here, like they put that on the table, and then they didn't take any questions yesterday. Johanna, for those of you who don't know, wears many hats: meteorologist, seismologist, private pilot, interest in aviation generally. What were you able to find out about weather conditions and runway conditions yesterday at Pearson?
So we have a weather report from Pearson Airport 12 minutes before the incident. And we know that winds were coming straight from the west, about 65 kilometer per hour gusts, blowing snow. Visibility was generally good, but we know based on the runway that this plane was landing on, runway 23, and the direction that the winds were coming from, there was about a 40-degree crosswind. That's what we call it when planes have to land with wind that is not directly head-on. Generally, we try and land the planes right into the wind. It helps lower that rate of descent. Often, though, a crosswind is something that we manage, and there's different techniques to manage that, but definitely a crosswind during that landing.
Yeah, and we're not saying that it was the wind that caused it. Often when there's an aviation incident, it's a series of things. Let's talk about the runway. What do we know about the runway conditions?
We also had reports of what the runway looked like. We know that there were patches of light snow, patches of cleared snow. We also know that that runway is about 200 feet wide. Only 160 feet of that runway was cleared. So coming down on approach, that runway would have looked different than it normally does. It would have looked narrow. Again, we can't say if that was a factor, but the distance would have not looked like it normally did if it was fully cleared.
And so from your perspective, what questions do you have about, like, if you could go up to whichever officials, like Transportation Safety Board, and say, listen, can you tell me some things? What questions would you have for them?
I am also interested in whether that crab maneuver was implemented. You turn the nose of the plane into the wind to help you compensate for that crosswind. And if the pilot had enough time to flare. I know that's a big question, lifting that nose up at the last minute to make for a softer landing. We've also seen some data from Flight Radar showing a very rapid rate of descent. And as you said, we can't attribute any of these factors, but there are a lot of factors. that that we're all watching in the next couple days.
And one of the things that we hope to do on this program is have a conversation with viewers. And so as you're watching this, if you have any questions about this crash, if there are any things that we've been talking about that you'd like a little bit of clarification, we invite you to send us an email. Hano Tonight, I did not choose this email handle, Hano Tonight at CBC.ca, and we will be working to get you answers.